My wife didn't want to do a DNA test. But when we did, I was shocked that my son is not mine. You know, it's funny how life can turn into something you never expected. One minute you're cruising along, thinking you've got it all figured out, and the next you're standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at a cup of cold coffee, trying to make sense of everything. That's where I found myself a few months ago. But let me back up a little. My name's Dave, just your average guy from Ohio. I'm in my mid-30s, married to a wonderful woman named Sarah, and we've got a beautiful little boy, Ethan, or so I thought. Sarah and I met in college. She was studying art history and I was in IT. I still remember the first time I saw her. She was standing in line at the campus coffee shop, arguing with the barista about the merits of oat milk versus almond milk. She had this way of talking, passionate but not overbearing, that made everyone around her stop and listen. I was hooked from the start. We got married right after graduation and bought a small house in the suburbs of Columbus. Nothing fancy, just enough for the two of us and, eventually, a family. Sarah painted in her spare time, and I landed a stable job in tech support. Life was good. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Then Ethan came along. He was the perfect baby. Happy, healthy, and full of life. But as he got older, people started making comments. "He doesn't look much like you, Dave," my buddy Jim said one day during a barbecue. "He's got Sarah's eyes, though." I laughed it off at the time. After all, genetics are weird, right? But the comments kept coming. It wasn't just Jim. My mom mentioned it once when she was over for dinner. "He's got such dark hair," she said, glancing at me and Sarah. "Where do you think he gets that from?" Now, I'm a light-haired guy, and Sarah's a blonde. But her dad had darker hair, so I figured Ethan must have gotten it from him. Still, the comments planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. Then came the day my parents suggested the DNA test. We were sitting around the dining table, celebrating Ethan's 3rd birthday. My dad, who's never been one to mince words, leaned over and said, "Dave, with all these ancestry kits people are doing these days, it might be fun to see what Ethan's heritage looks like." I knew what he was implying. So did Sarah. She went quiet, her smile fading as she stared at the half-eaten slice of cake on her plate. I brushed it off with a laugh, saying something about how we didn't need a test to know Ethan was ours. But that night, after everyone had gone home and Ethan was asleep, Sarah and I had our first real argument about it. "Why would your parents even suggest that?" she asked, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Do they think I'm lying to you?" "It's not like that," I said, trying to calm her down. "They're just curious. You know how my dad is." "Curious," she snapped. "Dave, this isn't curiosity. This is insulting." We went to bed angry that night, which wasn't like us. The tension lingered for days, and every time I looked at Ethan, that tiny seed of doubt grew a little bigger. Eventually, I decided to bring it up again. This time, I framed it differently. "Look, Sarah, it's not about me doubting you," I said. "It's just, I think it would put all these comments to rest. For both of us." She didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "Fine, let's do it. But when it comes back showing he's yours, I don't want to hear another word about it." So we ordered a kit online. It arrived a few days later, and we swabbed Ethan's cheek together, sealing the sample in its little plastic tube. I mailed it off the next morning and tried not to think about it. But, of course, that was impossible. Waiting for the results was agony. Every time my phone buzzed with an email notification, my stomach dropped. Sarah seemed fine on the surface, but I could tell she was just as anxious as I was. She stopped painting, which was always her way of decompressing. And I started working late, diving into endless spreadsheets and troubleshooting tickets just to keep my mind occupied. When the email finally came, I opened it alone. I don't know why I didn't wait for Sarah. Maybe I was scared of what I'd find. Or maybe I just needed a moment to process it myself. The results were clear. A 0% probability of paternity. Ethan wasn't mine. I don't remember much about the next few minutes. I think I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing in 1,000 different directions. How could this be? Was there a mistake? Could the lab have mixed up the samples? When I finally told Sarah, she broke down in tears. She admitted she'd had a brief fling with someone else early in our marriage, during a rough patch when we'd been arguing a lot. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I never thought it would come back to haunt us like this." I didn't say anything. What could I say? I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The woman I'd trusted more than anyone had betrayed me, and the child I'd loved as my own wasn't mine. For a few weeks, we lived in this awful limbo. I slept on the couch. Sarah tried to give me space, but every time she walked into the room, I felt this wave of anger and sadness wash over me. And Ethan, well, he was just a kid. He didn't understand why Daddy wasn't around as much. I thought about leaving. I really did. I even looked at apartments online, trying to imagine what my life would look like without Sarah and Ethan in it. But every time I got close to making a decision, something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Ethan's face lit up when I came home from work. or the way Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes, begging for another chance. And then, one night, I found myself back in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, staring at that cup of cold coffee. That's when it hit me. I had a choice. I could let this tear us apart, or I could try to forgive her. Not for her sake, but for mine. For Ethan's. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's not something you do once and forget about. It's a choice you make every single day. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still working on it. But what I can tell you is this. Love is messy. It's not about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If you told me a year ago that life could hand me 2 earth-shattering blows in quick succession, I wouldn't have believed you. And if you told me I'd come out of it stronger, maybe even a little wiser, I probably would have laughed in your face. But here I am, sitting in the same kitchen where so much of my world fell apart, trying to put into words what it's been like to learn how to live again. After we got the DNA results and everything came out in the open, Sarah and I had to make a choice. Move forward or let it all crumble. I won't lie to you, moving forward is not glamorous. It's messy and uncomfortable, full of moments where you doubt yourself and each other. But we made the decision to try. Therapy became a weekly ritual. At first, it felt like we were walking on eggshells in those sessions. The silence was heavy, the kind that makes you want to fill the air with anything, even if it's nonsense. But over time, we started talking, really talking. Sarah opened up about her fears and insecurities, about how she'd felt so distant from me during those early years of our marriage. And I had to confront some things about myself too, like how I tend to avoid conflict, thinking it'll just go away if I ignore it long enough. Spoiler, it doesn't. Ethan, of course, was blissfully unaware of all the undercurrents swirling around him. He just wanted his parents to play trucks with him and read him bedtime stories. And that's what kept me going, honestly. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of what really mattered. He didn't choose any of this. He was just a little boy who needed love and stability. So, Sarah and I started building a new kind of life. We relearned how to be a team, how to communicate, how to trust. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but we were making progress. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. Then came the second blow. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were at my parents' house, sitting in the living room while Ethan played with a box of my old Legos. My dad had been unusually quiet all day, which was unlike him. He's the kind of guy who always has a story to tell or a joke to crack. But that day, he just sat there, staring into his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Dave," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "your mom and I need to talk to you about something." I froze. Sarah reached for my hand, sensing the tension in the room. "What is it?" I asked, my heart already racing. My mom looked at my dad, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Maybe, or fear. "This isn't easy to say," she began. "But with everything you've been through lately, we felt it was time to be honest with you." And that's when they told me. My dad, the man who had raised me, taught me how to ride a bike, coached my little league team, and been there for every major milestone in my life, wasn't my biological father. My mom had had an affair early in their marriage, and I was the result. I can't even describe what it felt like to hear those words. It was like the floor had been pulled out from under me all over again. I just sat there, staring at them, my mind racing. How could they have kept this from me? Why tell me now when I was still trying to process everything with Sarah and Ethan? It felt like too much, like the universe was testing how much one person could take before breaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. My dad leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because I see what you're going through, Dave, and I see how much you're struggling to forgive Sarah. I thought you deserved to know that I've been where you are. When your mom told me the truth all those years ago, I was angry, hurt. I didn't think I could get past it." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "But then I looked at you. You were just a baby, completely innocent in all of this. And I realized that my love for you was bigger than my anger, bigger than my pride. So I made a choice to forgive. And it's the best decision I've ever made." Hearing those words broke something open inside me. I thought about all the times my dad had been there for me, all the love and support he'd given me over the years. He had every reason to walk away, to let his pride dictate his actions. But he didn't. He stayed. And he loved me as if I were his own flesh and blood. That's when it hit me. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you. It's about choosing to let go of the pain and anger, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve peace. After that conversation, something shifted in me. I started to see my situation with Sarah in a new light. She had made a mistake, yes, a big one, but she was also deeply sorry, and she was doing everything she could to make things right. And Ethan, well, he was my son, no matter what the DNA test said. Just like I was my dad's son, no matter what biology said. That night, as we drove home, I told Sarah about the conversation with my parents. She listened quietly, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she reached over and took my hand. "Your dad sounds like an incredible man," she said softly. "He is," I replied, "and I want to be that kind of man for Ethan." So here I am, still figuring it all out, one day at a time. Forgiveness isn't a straight path. It's a winding road with plenty of detours and potholes. But it's worth it, because in the end, love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. My dad taught me that, and now I'm trying to pass that lesson on. To Sarah, to Ethan, and maybe even to myself. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that forgiveness has the power to turn mistakes into lessons, and pain into something beautiful. What about you? Do you think you could forgive if it meant holding on to something worth saving?